So, back in 1096, months before the official First Crusade was even supposed to begin, this huge, unauthorized army of regular people just marched east to take back Jerusalem, and it was a complete and utter disaster. This is the story of the People's Crusade, the doomed first wave that was pretty much wiped out before the main event even got started.
It's a simple question, right? But the answer reveals a really brutal truth about medieval warfare. Things like timing, leadership, and preparation, they are the incredibly thin line between a holy victory and just total annihilation.
Just look at this timeline. It's basically a 6-month catalog of catastrophe. It all kicks off in April with this incredible religious fervor, but by May, that same fervor has curdled into these horrific massacres, pogroms really, against Jewish communities in the Rhineland. By July, they're not even fighting the enemy yet, and they're being attacked by their supposed Christian allies in Byzantine territory. And it all comes to a head in October with a final, brutal ambush in Anatolia. The whole thing was over almost as fast as it began. So, how did it all go so spectacularly wrong? Well, we're going to break it down. We'll look at the 4 key factors that led to this disaster. First, we'll talk about this unexpected uprising itself. Then, the total failure of leadership and logistics. We'll dive into how their own religious zeal became a fatal weakness, and how they ended up abandoned by their allies. And finally, we'll contrast all of this with the official Princes Crusade that came after to really understand why one succeeded where the other just didn't. Okay, so when Pope Urban II called for a crusade at Clermont in 1095, he was really talking to the knights and nobles of Europe. He even set a specific departure date, August 1096, but his message lit a fire he never intended, a massive spontaneous movement among the common people.
I mean, we're talking about an incredible wave of people, more than 30,000. They were driven by famine, by hardship, and this passionate belief that God was calling them personally. They weren't about to wait for the nobles. Instead, they flocked to these charismatic preachers who were promising salvation and a new life in the Holy Land.
And that brings us to the first, and maybe the most critical reason for their failure, a complete and total vacuum of military and logistical leadership. The main figurehead here was a man named Peter the Hermit, and listen to how the chronicler Gubert of Nogent described him. He says people saw him as this divine figure. He was an incredible speaker who inspired this kind of religious hysteria. But here's the thing, inspiring a crowd and commanding an army are 2 very different skill sets. And Peter's lack of military experience had absolutely disastrous consequences. With no real strategy, they left in April before the summer harvest. That move alone guaranteed they would run out of food. And with no plan for supplies, what happens? The crusade quickly turns to looting. And that looting leads to violence, which then transforms potential allies into enemies. This wasn't an army, it was an unruly, starving migration just waiting for disaster.
The second factor is a bit of a paradox. The very religious zeal that inspired the whole crusade was also one of the things that doomed it. See, fervor is a powerful motivator, but it is a terrible military strategist. This quote, recorded during the crusade, is just chilling. It shows how that zeal, with no disciplined leadership to check it, just curdled into something monstrous. Instead of waiting to fight Muslims in the Holy Land, some of these crusaders decided their first enemies were the Jewish communities right there in the Rhineland, which led to just horrific massacres.
And this impatience, this zeal, it led them step by step to their own destruction. Once they got to Anatolia, they completely ignored the Byzantine emperor's very sensible advice to wait for the main professional army. Driven by rivalry, they split into French and German factions. The Germans then rashly attacked a fortress, got themselves besieged, and were ultimately wiped out. And did the main army learn from this? Nope. They marched blindly to avenge them and walked straight into a perfectly laid Turkish ambush.
This brings us to the third fatal flaw. An army, especially one on a long march like this, desperately needs allies for supplies, for guidance, for safety, but the People's Crusade systematically turned every single potential ally into an enemy. The crucial point here is that they were a complete surprise. The King of Hungary, the Byzantine Emperor, nobody was prepared for tens of thousands of people to just suddenly start marching through their lands. So when the starving Crusaders inevitably started looting, these rulers didn't respond with aid. They responded with force, killing thousands of Crusaders before they ever even laid eyes on a Turkish soldier.
And the reaction of the Byzantine Emperor, Alexios I, really says it all. He saw the People's Crusade as this dangerous, disorderly mob,
a liability to be shipped across the Bosporus and out of his hair as fast as humanly possible. But then, when the Princes Crusade arrived months later, he didn't see a mob. He saw a professional army. He negotiated with them, he supplied them, and he used them as a powerful, if a little dangerous, tool. So, to really understand why the People's Crusade failed so badly, we have to compare it to the one that came right after it, the Princes Crusade. This was the official first wave, and against all odds, it actually succeeded.
First, let's talk leadership. It's night and day. Instead of a preacher, the main crusade was led by some of the most powerful and experienced military commanders in Europe. These guys had fought wars, they had vast personal wealth to fund supplies, and they knew how to command disciplined armies.
Second, strategy. The Princes Crusade replaced that chaotic zeal with actual military discipline. They used scouts, they understood siege warfare, and they could execute complex maneuvers, like the heavy cavalry charges that absolutely smashed Turkish armies at key battles like Dorylaeum.
Third, Allied support. Now, their relationship with the Byzantines was always tense, let's be honest, but the princes secured vital help. They got food, they got guides, they even got naval support that was absolutely critical in capturing the first major city, Nicaea. They got cooperation where the People's Crusade got hostility.
And finally, exploiting the enemy. The Muslim world at this time was politically fragmented, but only a disciplined, well-led army could actually take advantage of that. When the princes arrived at Nika, the local Seljuk sultan, Kilish Arslan, was literally away fighting other Muslims. This critical mistake gave the Crusades a foothold, an opportunity the disorganized People's Crusade was completely incapable of creating or seizing.
So when you lay it all out like this, the contrast is just stark. The People's Crusade had passion. It had zeal, no doubt about it. But the Princes' Crusade had leadership, logistics, strategy, and alliances. One was annihilated within months, the other marched all the way to capture Jerusalem.
Which leaves us with a final and pretty fascinating question. Did the absolute disaster of the People's Crusade serve as a brutal but maybe necessary lesson? Was it a cautionary tale for the princes who followed, showing them exactly how not to run a crusade, and in doing so, maybe even paving the way for their own improbable victory?